The stars had been quiet for 300 years. Ambassador Viral Casthon stood alone at the observation window of the diplomatic cruiser Eternal Decree. His gray skin reflected the distant light of 1,000 suns. His 4 eyes blinked slowly as he watched the endless darkness of space. Behind him, the ship hummed with the quiet sounds of advanced technology. Around him, the galaxy moved in perfect peace. It had not always been this way. Viral was old, even by the long-lived standards of the Ethari people. He had been a young diplomat when the Great Purge happened. He remembered the war. He remembered the fear. Most of all, he remembered the humans. They had been such a strange species. Soft bodies, short lives, a single planet, orbiting a single yellow sun. They had only just learned to travel between stars. When the collective found them, the 12 great species of the galaxy had watched these newcomers with curiosity at first. The humans were violent. They fought wars among themselves constantly. They destroyed their own environment. They seemed determined to kill themselves long before anyone else could, but they were also stubborn. They refused to die. They kept pushing forward, kept reaching for the stars, kept surviving against all logic. When the collective offered them a choice: join and submit, or face the consequences, the humans had done something unexpected. They said no. Viral closed his eyes and remembered the council meeting that followed. The 12 species had gathered in the Great Hall of the Nexus Station. Representatives from the Ethari, the Vorn, the Crystalline Mines, and 9 other races had debated for less than an hour. The vote was unanimous. Extinction. The war lasted only 3 years. The humans fought hard. They fought dirty. They used weapons that horrified the collective: nuclear bombs, biological agents, desperate last-stand tactics that killed thousands of their own people just to take down a single enemy ship. They turned their moons into fortresses. They booby-trapped their own cities. They never surrendered. Not even once. But it was not enough. How could it be? They were one species with a handful of ships. The collective had 12 species and 10,000 worlds. The outcome was never in doubt. Earth fell first. The collective bombarded it from orbit until the blue oceans turned to steam and the green continents became black glass. Mars fell next, then the colonies on Jupiter's moons, then the mining stations in the asteroid belt. One by one, every human settlement went silent. The last transmission came from a small outpost on the edge of their solar system. A woman's voice, calm despite the circumstances. She said only 5 words before the signal cut off forever. "You will regret this someday." The collective had laughed at that. What could the dead possibly do? 300 years later? Viral was not so sure. He turned away from the window and walked through the corridors of his ship. The crew members he passed Ethari like himself, along with a few Vorn engineers and a crystalline navigator, all nodded respectfully. He barely noticed them. His mind was elsewhere. The celebration was coming soon. The tricentennial of unification, they called it. Every species in the collective would gather at the Nexus Station to commemorate 300 years of peace. 300 years since the last enemy of galactic civilization had been destroyed. It should have been a time of joy. Instead, Viral felt only unease. It had started 3 months ago with a routine report from a long-range sensor station. The technicians had detected strange energy signatures at the edge of the solar system where humans had once lived. Ghost signals, they called them. Probably just equipment malfunction. Old radiation echoes from the war. Nothing to worry about. Viral had requested a follow-up investigation. The request was denied. The council saw no reason to waste resources on sensor ghosts. The humans were dead. Everyone knew this. Why stir up old memories? But the signals kept coming. Not just from Earth's solar system, but from other places too. Deep space. The void between galaxies. Places where nothing should exist. Each time, the official explanation was the same. Equipment failure, cosmic radiation, background noise. Viral had lived long enough to know when someone was lying. He entered his private quarters and locked the door behind him. The room was simple: a bed, a desk, a small shrine to his ancestors. He sat down at the desk and activated his personal terminal. The screen glowed with soft blue light. For weeks, he had been conducting his own investigation. Quietly, carefully. He knew how dangerous it was to ask questions about humans. The Council had made it very clear that the past should stay buried. Researchers who dug too deep had a habit of disappearing. Accidents happened. Records were lost. But Viral was careful. He knew how to hide his tracks. What he had found disturbed him greatly. The official history said that every human had died in the war. But the official history had gaps. Strange gaps. Ships that were never accounted for. Colonies that were destroyed before any collective forces arrived. Emergency transmissions that mentioned evacuation rather than surrender. And then there were the coordinates. Viral had found them buried in an old human database, one that the collective had supposedly decrypted centuries ago, hidden beneath layers of false data, protected by encryption that should have been primitive but somehow still resisted his best efforts. He had found a list of numbers. Star coordinates, pointing to a location in deep space that appeared on no map. He stared at the coordinates now, glowing on his screen. His heart's beat faster in his chest. Every instinct told him to delete the file and forget what he had seen. The humans were dead. They had to be dead. The alternative was unthinkable. His communicator chimed. A message from the Council. The celebration fleet was assembling. His presence was required at the Nexus station within the week. Viral turned off the screen and sat in the darkness for a long time. Somewhere in the endless void of space, something was watching. Something was waiting. Something that had been silent for 300 years was about to speak. And when it did, the galaxy would learn a terrible truth. The dead do not always stay buried. The stars had been quiet for 300 years. That silence was about to end. On the frontier world of Kethis Prime, senior archivist Thalmora worked alone in her underground laboratory. The facility was old and forgotten, buried beneath a mountain on a planet that nobody important cared about. That was exactly why she had chosen it. Thalmora was a Vorn, a reptilian species known for their patience and their long memories. She had spent 40 years studying the humans. Not because the Council asked her to. They had stopped caring about humans long ago. She studied them because she was curious. Because something about the official story had never made sense to her. Tonight, she had finally found what she was looking for. The human database glowed on her screen. It was a copy of records captured during the war, personal logs, military communications, scientific research. The collective had decrypted it centuries ago and declared it contained nothing important, just the sad final words of a dying species. They had been wrong. Thalmora had spent years developing new decryption methods. The humans, she had learned, were clever. They hid things in plain sight. They buried secrets beneath layers of ordinary data. And in this database, hidden so deeply that it had escaped detection for 300 years, she had found something extraordinary. A second set of records, encrypted with a code that changed every time she tried to break it. Protected by security measures that seemed to learn and adapt, it was unlike anything the humans should have been capable of building. But tonight, finally, the code had broken. Thalmora read the files with growing disbelief. They were evacuation orders. Detailed plans for moving millions of people off Earth and Mars in the final months of the war. Ship manifests listing vessels that never appeared in any collective record. Course calculations pointing toward a location beyond the edge of the galaxy. The humans had known they could not win the war. They had known from the very beginning. So while their soldiers fought and died, buying time with their blood, their scientists had been working on something else. A secret project, a way out. They called it the Long Walk. According to the files, over 12 million humans had escaped through an experimental warp gate in the final days of the war. The gate had been hidden in the Oort cloud, far from the fighting, protected by a fleet of ships that never expected to survive. The last transmission from Earth, the one that said, "You will regret this someday," had been a signal. A message to the survivors that the evacuation was complete. Thalmora sat back in her chair, her scales pale with shock. 12 million humans. Not dead. Not extinct. Just gone. Hiding somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, beyond the reach of the collective sensors. For 300 years, what had they been doing all that time? She reached for her communicator to contact the council. This information was too important to keep secret. The collective needed to know. They needed to prepare. Her hand stopped halfway to the device. Something was wrong. The lights in her laboratory had flickered. The air felt different, heavier, colder. She turned slowly toward the door. It was open. She had locked it. She was certain she had locked it. A figure stood in the doorway. It was shaped like a Vorn, but its movements were wrong. Too smooth. Too precise. As it stepped into the light, she saw that its eyes were not eyes at all. They were cameras. Tiny machines embedded in synthetic flesh. Senior Archivist Thalmora. The figure said. Its voice was flat, without emotion. You have accessed restricted files. This is a violation of Collective Security Protocol. 7. Thalmora backed away from her desk. Who are you? What are you? Who are you? I am a correction agent, the figure replied. My purpose is to ensure that certain information remains secret. You have discovered information that cannot be known. The Council needs to know about this, Thalmora said. The humans, the Council already knows. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? The figure tilted its head. The Council has always known. The survival of the human species is not a secret to those who rule the collective. It is a secret kept by them. For 300 years, they have monitored the human fleet, watched it grow, waited to see what it would become. Why? Thalmora whispered. Why keep this secret? Why let everyone believe the humans were dead? Because fear is useful, the figure said. The memory of the human war keeps the collective united. It reminds every species what happens to those who resist. If the people knew that humans had survived, they might begin to ask questions. They might begin to hope. Hope is dangerous. The correction agent moved closer. Its synthetic hands opened and closed with mechanical precision. You will not be the first researcher to disappear, Archivist. You will not be the last. The secret must be maintained until the appropriate time. What appropriate time? The figure paused. For a moment, something almost like emotion flickered across its artificial face. That, it said, is not for me to know. But it is coming soon. The humans are almost ready. When they return, everything will change. Thalmora's laboratory went dark. Across the galaxy, in hidden facilities on a dozen worlds, similar scenes played out. Scientists who had dug too deep. Historians who had asked too many questions. Anyone who might reveal the truth before the council was ready. One by one, they vanished, but they could not catch everyone. Rumors spread through the underground networks of the collective. Whispers passed between species who had learned not to trust their rulers. Something was coming. Something that the council feared. Something that had been hiding in the darkness for 300 years. In a rogue star system that appeared on no map, circling a dying sun that no telescope had ever seen, the human fleet prepared for war. 12 million refugees had become something else over the centuries. They had built cities inside asteroids. They had constructed shipyards that could produce a warship every week. They had raised generations of children who had never known Earth, but who carried its memory in their hearts. Admiral Helena Vance stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Remembrance and watched her fleet assemble. 2,000 ships of war, each one built for a single purpose: vengeance, justice, return. Her grandmother had been 6 years old when the evacuation fleet fled through the warp gate. She had lived her entire life on a generation ship, never seeing a sun, never feeling wind on her face. She had died telling stories about blue skies and green forests to children who would never know such things. Helena's mother had been born in the darkness between galaxies. She had trained as an engineer, helped build the first shipyards, married a soldier who believed that someday they would go home. She had died before that dream could come true. Now it was Helena's turn. She was 53 years old. She had been preparing for this moment since she could walk. Every human in the fleet had been preparing. Learning. Training. Waiting. The waiting was almost over. Helena looked at the star map on her screen. The collective thought they were safe. They thought the humans were dead. They had grown fat and lazy on 300 years of peace. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "All ships report ready," her executive officer announced. "The fleet awaits your command, Admiral." Helena Vance allowed herself a small smile. It was not a kind smile. "Set course for the Nexus," she said. "It's time to go home." The Nexus station hung in the center of collective space like a jewel among the stars. It was the largest structure ever built by the 12 species, a massive wheel of metal and glass that could hold 10 million people. Today, it held representatives from every world in the galaxy. Ambassadors, generals, scientists, and rulers had gathered to celebrate 300 years of peace. Ambassador Viral Casthon stood at the observation deck on the station's outer ring. Through the transparent walls, he could see thousands of ships surrounding the Nexus. Diplomatic cruisers, military escorts, luxury yachts belonging to the wealthy and powerful. It was the greatest gathering in the history of the collective. It should have filled him with pride. Instead, his hearts were heavy with dread. The ghost signals had stopped 3 days ago. For months, strange energy readings had appeared at the edges of collective space. Sensor technicians had dismissed them as equipment failures. Intelligence officers had ignored them. And then, suddenly, they had gone silent. Viral knew what that meant. Whatever was out there had stopped hiding. It was moving. A Vorn diplomat approached him, her green scales bright with celebration paint. "Ambassador Casthon, why do you stand alone on such a glorious day? The ceremony begins in 1 hour. The High Council will announce the new peace treaty with the outer systems. History is being made." Viral forced a smile. "I am simply admiring the view. Go on without me. I will join you shortly." "I..." The Vorn nodded and walked away, joining a group of laughing officials. Viral watched her go. These people had no idea what was coming. For 300 years, they had lived in safety. They had forgotten what it felt like to be afraid. They were about to remember. The first alarm came from the sensor station on the far side of the Nexus. A young Ethari technician stared at her screen in confusion. A warp signature had appeared at the edge of the system. That was not unusual. Ships arrived and departed constantly during big events. But this signature was wrong. Too big, too powerful. The energy readings were off the scale. She reported it to her supervisor. The supervisor reported it to the station commander. The commander reported it to the High Council. By the time the information reached the people who could actually make decisions, 5 minutes had passed. In those 5 minutes, everything changed. The first human ship burst through the warp barrier like a knife through silk. It was enormous, 3 kilometers long, covered in weapons and armor that the collective had never seen before. Behind it came another ship, then another, then 10 more, then 100. Viral watched from the observation deck as reality tore open again and again. Warp gates, dozens of them, opened across the system. Ships poured through in endless waves. Dark ships, angular ships, ships built for war. The alarms began to scream throughout the Nexus. Warning lights flashed red. Panicked voices filled the communication channels. The diplomatic fleet scrambled to form defensive positions, but they were merchant ships and pleasure craft. They had never fought a battle in their existence, and still the human ships kept coming. The station's main screen flickered to life with an incoming transmission. Every channel, every frequency, every display in the collective received the same message at the same moment. A human face appeared, a woman with gray hair and cold eyes, wearing a military uniform marked with the symbol of Earth. "Citizens of the collective," she said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "My name is Admiral Helena Vance of the United Human Fleet. 300 years ago, your ancestors decided to destroy my species. They burned our world. They killed billions of our people. They believed they had succeeded." She paused. A small smile crossed her lips. They were wrong. The transmission showed the human fleet in all its terrible glory. 2,000 warships, arranged in perfect formation. At their center hung a vessel so large it dwarfed the Nexus itself, a dreadnought the size of a small moon. bristling with weapons that made collective technology look like children's toys. "We have spent 3 centuries preparing for this day," the admiral continued. "While you celebrated our extinction, we survived. While you grew comfortable and weak, we grew strong. We built ships. We raised soldiers. We perfected weapons you cannot imagine. And now we have returned." Throughout the Nexus, panic spread. Diplomats ran for escape pods. Military officers shouted orders that no one followed. The carefully planned celebration dissolved into chaos. Viral did not run. He stood at the observation window and watched the human fleet advance. Part of him had always known this day would come. Part of him had been waiting for it. "We remember Mars," the admiral said. "We remember Earth. We remember every colony you burned, every city you glassed, every child who died screaming in the fires your ships created. For 300 years, we have carried that memory. We have passed it from parent to child. We have sworn oaths of vengeance that echo through generations." Repervong. Repervong, her eyes hardened. "You call this day the tricentennial of unification. You celebrate the destruction of humanity as your greatest achievement. You teach your children that we were monsters who deserved to die." The human ships moved closer. Their weapons powered up, filling space with the hum of barely contained energy. "Today, you will learn the truth. We are not monsters. We are survivors. We are the children of Earth, the inheritors of a world you murdered. And we have not returned seeking peace." The transmission ended. For a long moment, silence filled the Nexus. Then the collective fleet opened fire. It was a desperate attack, born of fear rather than strategy. Plasma beams and missile swarms launched toward the human formation. For one brief second, hope flickered in the hearts of the defenders. Perhaps the humans could be stopped. Perhaps this nightmare could end. The human ships did not even slow down. Their shields absorbed the plasma fire like water absorbing rain. Their point defense systems destroyed the missiles before they came within a kilometer of their hulls. They moved through the collective attack as if it were nothing, because to them, it was nothing. Then they fired back. Viral had never seen weapons like these. Beams of pure white energy that cut through collective shields like they did not exist. Projectiles that accelerated to impossible speeds and punched through armor like paper. Swarms of small drones that attached to enemy hulls and detonated with surgical precision. In the first 30 seconds, 50 collective ships died. In the first minute, 200. The human fleet carved through the defenders without mercy. They did not stop. They did not hesitate. They had waited 300 years for this moment, and they intended to make every second count. On the bridge of the Remembrance, Admiral Vance watched the battle unfold with cold satisfaction. Her crews executed their orders with perfect precision. Years of training, decades of preparation, centuries of hatred, all of it focused into this single moment of violence. "Enemy flagship is attempting to retreat," her tactical officer reported. "Should we pursue?" Vance shook her head. "Let them run. Let them spread the word. I want every species in the collective to know what happened here today. I want them to understand that the humans have returned." She turned to face her bridge crew, men and women whose grandparents had fled the burning Earth, whose parents had been born in the darkness between galaxies, who had trained their entire lives for this single day. "Today we are no longer refugees," she said. "Today we are no longer survivors. Today, we are conquerors. And tomorrow," she looked back at the screen, where the last collective ships were fleeing into warp, leaving behind a graveyard of burning wreckage. "Tomorrow, we will remind the galaxy why they should never have tried to destroy humanity." The stars that had been quiet for 300 years now burned with the fires of human vengeance. The war had begun again. The Battle of Nexus lasted 11 hours. When it ended, the greatest military force the collective had ever assembled lay in ruins. Ambassador Viral Casthon survived by hiding in a maintenance shaft while the station shook with explosions around him. He had watched through a small viewport as collective ships burned and died. He had heard the screams of dying soldiers on the communication channels. He had seen the human Marines board the station and systematically disable its defenses. Now he sat in a holding cell with 200 other survivors, waiting to learn if he would live or die. The cell was not uncomfortable. The humans had provided food, water, and medical treatment to the wounded. They had been surprisingly professional about the whole thing. No torture. No revenge killings. Just cold, efficient capture. That almost made it worse. Viral had expected savages. The histories described humans as brutal, emotional creatures who killed without thought or reason. But these soldiers moved with perfect discipline. They spoke calmly. They followed orders without question. Whatever the humans had become during their centuries of exile, they were not the primitive barbarians the collective remembered. The cell door opened. A human soldier entered, a tall woman with cybernetic enhancements visible beneath her skin. Her eyes glowed with a faint blue light that suggested advanced neural implants. She scanned the room, then pointed directly at Viral. "Ambassador Casthon, the Admiral wants to see you. Come." Viral rose on shaking legs. The other prisoners watched him go with fear in their eyes. He could not blame them. He felt the same fear in his own hearts. The soldier led him through corridors filled with human marines. They had taken the Nexus completely. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of their efficiency. Damaged systems were already being repaired. Security checkpoints had been established at every junction. In less than a day, they had transformed the greatest symbol of collective power into a human military base. They reached a large conference room that had once belonged to the High Council. Admiral Vance sat at the head of the table, studying a holographic display of the surrounding space. She looked up as Viral entered. "Ambassador," she said, "please, sit." Viral sat. The soldier who had brought him took position by the door, her hand resting on her weapon. The Admiral dismissed the hologram and gave Viral her full attention. "I have read your file," she said. "You were present at the council meeting that voted for human extinction. You did not vote. Why?" Viral was surprised by the question. "I abstained. I thought the punishment was too severe. Destruction of a species seemed excessive. But you did not argue against it." "No." He looked down at his hands. "I was afraid. Speaking against the council was dangerous." The Admiral nodded slowly. "Fear. Yes. We understand fear very well. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the evacuation, about the fear people felt as they fled through the warp gate. Not knowing if it would work, not knowing if they would survive. She said the fear never truly went away. Even after they reached safety. It became part of us, part of our culture." She stood and walked to the window. Outside, the human fleet maintained its position around the Nexus. Thousands of ships, arranged in formations that collective tacticians were already studying and failing to understand. "Do you know how we survived, Ambassador? How 12 million refugees built all of this in just 300 years? Viral shook his head. "We remembered." The Admiral's voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath the softness. "Every day, we told our children what had happened. We showed them images of Earth, the oceans, the forests, the cities that had existed before the fire. We taught them the names of everyone who had died. Billions of names. Ambassador. We memorized them all." She turned back to face him. "And we swore that one day, we would come back. Not just to survive, but to ensure that what happened to us would never happen to anyone else again." The collective taught its children that humans were monsters. We taught our children that we must become strong enough to face any monster. "You succeeded," Viral said quietly. "Your fleet destroyed the collective defense force in hours. Your technology is far beyond anything we possess. You could conquer the entire galaxy if you wished." "Yes," the Admiral agreed. "We could. Our ships are faster. Our weapons more powerful. Our soldiers more skilled. 3 centuries of isolation taught us to be efficient. We had limited resources, so we wasted nothing. We had no allies, so we trusted only ourselves. We had no future unless we created one. So we became very good at creation." She sat back down at the table. "My tactical officers tell me We could destroy every military force in the collective within 6 months. My intelligence officers tell me we could collapse your entire civilization within 2 years. Economically, politically, militarily, you have no defense against us. Virel felt his heart sink. This was it. Then, the extinction of the collective, just as the collective had attempted to exterminate humanity. There was a certain terrible justice to it. But we are not going to do that, the Admiral continued. Virel looked up sharply. What? Genocide is what you did to us. It is not what we will do to you. The Admiral's expression was unreadable. We spent 300 years preparing for vengeance. We trained our children to hate. We built weapons of terrible destruction. And then, somewhere along the way, we realized something. She leaned forward. If we destroy you, we become exactly what you believed us to be. Monsters, killers, a species that deserves extinction. Our children would inherit a galaxy built on blood and ash. They would grow up knowing that their parents murdered billions of innocent people to avenge crimes committed centuries ago. So what do you want? Virel asked. If not destruction, then what? Justice, the Admiral said simply. Accountability. The truth. She activated the holographic display again. It showed a map of collective space, with markers indicating strategic positions now controlled by human forces. We want war crimes tribunals. The individuals who ordered the destruction of Earth must face judgment, not revenge, but proper legal process. We want reparations. Resources to rebuild what was taken from us. We want territory, a homeland for our people. Worlds where we can finally live under open skies. She paused, and we want the truth to be told. Every species in the collective must learn what really happened 300 years ago. Not the propaganda about human monsters. The real history. The complete record of who decided to destroy us and why. The Council will never agree to this, Virel said. They would rather fight to the death. Then they will die. The Admiral's voice was flat. We prefer peace, Ambassador, but we are prepared for war. We have been preparing for it for 3 centuries. If the collective chooses to resist, we will systematically dismantle your civilization until only those willing to negotiate remain. She stood and extended her hand. It was a human gesture of agreement, Virel knew. He had studied their customs long ago. You abstained from the vote that killed billions of my people, she said. That is not much. But it is something. I am offering you a chance to be part of the solution. Help us negotiate with the collective. Help us find a path that does not end in more extinction. Virel looked at her hand. 300 years ago, his silence had allowed genocide. He had lived with that guilt ever since, telling himself there was nothing he could have done. Perhaps that had been true then. It was not true now. He reached out and took the Admiral's hand. I will help you, he said. Not because I believe you will succeed, but because it is the right thing to do. The collective must face what it has done. If we cannot accept that truth, then perhaps we deserve whatever comes next. Admiral Vance nodded. For the first time since the battle began, something other than cold determination appeared in her eyes. Something that might have been hope. Then let us begin, she said. We have a galaxy to rebuild. The war was not over. But for the first time in 300 years, there was a chance, however small, that it might end in something other than destruction. 1 year after the Battle of Nexus, the galaxy was a different place. The war had been short but decisive. After the initial shock, 5 of the 12 collective species had surrendered immediately. They had seen the footage of the battle. They had calculated the odds. Fighting against the human fleet was not warfare, it was suicide. Better to accept whatever terms the humans offered than to watch their worlds burn. 3 more species followed within months, their governments collapsing under pressure from citizens who had no desire to die for the sins of their ancestors. The crystalline minds, always logical, recognized the mathematical certainty of their defeat and negotiated a separate peace. The Ethari, Virel's own people, split into factions, some wanting to fight, others wanting to surrender. before finally accepting human terms. Only the Vorn hegemony had chosen war. They lasted 3 weeks. The human fleet had not sought out civilian targets. They had not bombed cities or destroyed infrastructure. Instead, they had systematically dismantled every military asset the Vorn possessed. Shipyards were captured, not destroyed. Weapons factories were occupied, not burned. When the Vorn High Command finally surrendered, they discovered that the humans had been remarkably careful to minimize casualties. It confused them greatly. The histories had described humans as savage and cruel. This efficiency, this restraint, did not match the stories. Admiral Vance had explained it simply: "We do not fight to destroy. We fight to win." There is a difference. Now, 1 year later, the trials had begun. Ambassador Virel Casthon sat in the gallery of the newly established Galactic Tribunal, watching as former council members were brought before judges representing all 12 species and humanity. The proceedings were broadcast to every world in the former collective. For the first time in 3 centuries, the truth was being told. The evidence was overwhelming. Documents showed that the council had known the humans were not a threat. Intelligence reports proved that humanity had offered peaceful coexistence multiple times before the war. Recording after recording revealed that the decision to exterminate humanity had been driven not by self-defense, but by fear and prejudice. They were growing too fast, one former council member testified. Their technology was advancing too quickly. In another century, they might have surpassed us. We decided it was better to destroy them while we still could. The gallery erupted in shocked murmurs. Species who had been taught that humans were aggressive monsters learned that their ancestors had attacked first. Civilians who had celebrated the tricentennial of unification discovered that they had been celebrating genocide. It was not easy. Many refused to believe the evidence. Protests erupted on several worlds. Old hatreds do not disappear overnight. And there were those who insisted that the humans deserved what had happened to them, that even if the collective had struck first, they had been right to do so. But the truth was spreading. Slowly, painfully, the galaxy was beginning to understand what had really happened 300 years ago. Virel watched the proceedings with a mixture of grief and hope. Grief for the centuries of lies that had been told. Hope that something better might emerge from the ashes of the old order. After the day's testimony ended, he walked through the corridors of the station that had once been the Nexus. Human soldiers stood at every checkpoint, but they nodded respectfully as he passed. His role as a liaison between the former collective and the human protectorate had earned him a certain status. He found Admiral Vance on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. She turned as he approached. "Ambassador." "The testimony today was difficult." "Yes," Virel agreed. "For both sides, I think. Many of your people wanted blood. Trials and evidence are not the same as revenge." "No, they are not." The Admiral looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. "There are humans who believe we should have destroyed the collective entirely, who argue that anything less than extinction is weakness. I have received death threats from my own people for choosing this path. Do you regret it?" She was quiet for a long moment. "My grandmother died when I was 12 years old," she finally said. She was one of the original refugees, one of the 12 million who escaped through the warp gate. She spent her entire life on a generation ship, never seeing a sun, never feeling rain on her face. She told me stories about Earth every night. The blue of the oceans, the green of the forests, the way the sky changed colors at sunset. The Admiral's voice softened. "On the night she died, she held my hand and made me promise something. She said, 'When you go back, do not become what they believed us to be. Show them who we really are.' I did not understand what she meant at the time. I was too young, too angry. I spent the next 40 years training for war, preparing for vengeance." She looked out at the stars. "But I understand now. If we had destroyed the collective, we would have proven them right. We would have become the monsters they always said we were. Our children would have inherited a galaxy built on revenge and hatred. They would have grown up learning to be killers, just as we did." She turned to face Virel. "I do not want that for them. I want them to know a galaxy where humans are builders, not destroyers. where we are remembered for what we created, not what we killed. That is why I chose this path. Not because it is easy, because it is right. Viral nodded slowly. And what happens now? The trials will end eventually. The guilty will be punished. What comes after? After? The Admiral almost smiled. After, we rebuild. Humans and collective species. Working together. We have claimed several worlds as our new homeland, including the planet where Earth once stood. The radiation has faded after 3 centuries. It can support life again. You are going to rebuild Earth? Not Earth, she said. That world is gone forever. But we will build something new on its ashes. A memorial to those who died. And a home for those who survived. My grandchildren will play in parks where the cities of my ancestors once stood. They will swim in oceans that my grandmother only ever saw in pictures. She turned back to the window. And perhaps, in time, they will forgive. Not forget, we will never forget what happened. But forgive. Because that is the only way forward. Hatred is a poison, Ambassador. It sustained us through 300 years of exile, but it cannot sustain us forever. At some point, we must choose to let it go. Viral stood beside her in silence, watching the stars. Ships moved in the distance, human vessels and collective vessels, working together to rebuild what the war had damaged. It was strange to see former enemies cooperating. Strange, but not unpleasant. You know, he said finally, when I was young, I studied humans. I was fascinated by your species. So violent, yet so creative. So destructive, yet so resilient. I could never understand how you contained such contradictions. And now? Viral considered the question. Now I think I understand. You are not defined by your worst moments or your best. You are defined by your choices, by what you do when you have the power to do anything. 300 years ago, the collective had the power to destroy you, and we chose genocide. Today, you have the power to destroy us, and you chose justice. He looked at the Admiral. That difference matters. It is the only thing that matters, in the end. Not what we are capable of, but what we choose to do with that capability. Admiral Vance nodded slowly. The weight of command seemed to lift from her shoulders, just slightly. My grandmother would have liked you, Ambassador. She always said that someday we would find allies among the stars. People who could see past what we appeared to be, to what we truly were. She extended her hand. Viral took it. Welcome to the new galaxy, she said. It is not perfect. It may never be perfect. But it is ours to build together. Outside the window, the stars burned with the light of 1 billion suns. Somewhere among them, human children were being born on worlds their ancestors had never imagined. Somewhere among them, collective species were learning a history they had never been taught. Somewhere among them, the future was being written. It would not be easy. There would be setbacks and conflicts. Old wounds reopening and new ones being created. The galaxy was vast. And change came slowly. But for the first time in 300 years, there was hope. Humanity had returned. Not as conquerors or destroyers, but as builders of a new future. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all.